Okay, so your extension question for this week is a 8-mark question, and it reads like this. In what ways were the lives of women in Germany affected by Nazi social policies? Okay, so that is just a posh way of saying, how did life change for women under the Nazi regime? Okay, so it's all the things that I was talked about previously to do with the changes that they had to make to their lifestyle, to becoming more traditional women that were used to rearing their families. And, for some women, it really should be, not underestimated here. For some women, that lifestyle suited, a traditional housewife lifestyle where they were looking after the home, they were rearing their children, they had structure, and security within that. They would have actually quite liked that and taken a lot of pride in the fact that their role was being valued by the government. Okay? So for some women, it was, I suppose in that sense, not much of a change if they were already housewives already. But for many women that had professional careers, it would have changed radically because they would have lost their jobs and maybe been forced to start a family before they were ready, or even kind of, on an even darker side of things, kind of pressured to marry somebody that they wouldn't have necessarily chosen to marry, or marry before they felt like they were ready to marry. For example, many women married at the age of 18, whereas during the Weimar Republic, they would have had more opportunity to go to somewhere like university, especially if they were kind of middle or upper class. Other ways that they changed, so you could talk about their appearance, to do with the fact that they dressed differently. Things like makeup was frowned upon, and there was a huge stigma behind if you dressed in the way that people used to dress in the 1920s, or dressed in any kind of American style, so the way that the Americans dressed, because they wanted their women to look more traditional and more conservative. And you could talk about as well the fact that their life revolved around the home. The other thing that's worth noting is that after 1939, things changed for women again, because after 1939, all the men were conscripted to go to war, which meant that the women had to go back to work. It kind of contradicted all the policies of the 1930s, or up until that point in the 1930s, because women were needed in the factories. So from 1939 onwards, women were joining the factories and working, especially in munition factories, working on building up the weapons for the army. So their lives would have changed radically again. On top of that, they would have faced heavy rationing, because the government stopped producing anything other than essential food, and a large bulk of that essential food, like grain production, went to the front, went to the soldiers. So women and their children were having to live very difficult, poor lives, on a poor diet, struggling, without any luxuries. You could say it's like going back to, the early 1930s and the time of the Great Depression, because women didn't have much at that point, and their husband was away fighting in the war. So it's worth reading up about that. Now, in order to sort of structure your answer, I've given you a writing frame, so please use it, or at least have a look at it and plan it, your answer from it. It's an 8-mark question, so we're looking for 2 Peel paragraphs, okay? And I would focus on 2 very different ways that lives were affected under the Nazi regime, okay? If you do two kind of similar ideas, an examiner might look and say, oh, actually the second paragraph is really just an extension of the first. So, you know, like I said, just two clear different ideas. The way I would do it is I'd focus one paragraph on how women were encouraged to become kind of baby making machines and, you know, have huge families and you know, serve in the household. And then the second paragraph, I would focus on how their lives were affected during World War II by the rationing and having to go back to work in the factories during that time. If you have any questions, please comment on Teams and I will check and I will answer those. You can turn in your answer using Teams, and don't forget to use Seneca to learn about the sort of nitty-gritty of these two topics. And I'll be looking to see how many of you have been doing that this time next week.